Welcome to State of the Art Southern Illinois, a podcast by the Marion Cultural and Civic Center. Our guest today is Vincent Segretario, one half of the dark synth pop duo Wingtips. Vincent and I discuss their music, how their backgrounds influenced their music, and how their most recent album, Cutting Room Floor, came together.
She was there, and you were in it, kissing her all night.
Vincent, thank you for joining us.
It's good to be here.
You grew up here in Marion,
Yeah.
and you did a lot of musical theater right here at the Marion Cultural and Civic Center.
Mm-hmm.
And that was long before Wingtips ever existed. So musical theater was obviously somewhat of an influence on you. Was that part of you knowing you wanted to become a performer, or did that happen at some other point?
Yeah, definitely. After I spent a few years in college, I kind of realized that what I liked most about theater was performing, and I really loved to sing too. But it wasn't necessarily the direction I wanted to go in theater. And so I still have a huge passion for music. Obviously, it's what I do full time. So they kind of merged organically, and it's what I ended up doing and what I'm still doing. So it's what I do today. There's still a lot of theatrical element in it. And Hannah as well, my bandmate, we both were in theater school. It's where we met. And we both have that element of performance that we bring to what we do in our show. And even in our songwriting too, there's a lot of theatricality, and a lot of almost like cinema elements too, and how there's like an arc. And yeah.
So you ended up diving into music. Let's talk about where music started for you. Like, what kind of music was in the house while you were growing up?
My house wasn't really a music-heavy house. It was kind of every man for himself, just figuring out what spoke to you. My brother had his own musical interests and what he was into. I followed along for a bit, and definitely had some takeaway from obviously having a sibling that found music earlier than I did. But I'd say my earliest musical memories would have been around like first and second grade. And it's really interesting where the roots lie. My parents were kind of bad parents when they got me Grand Theft Auto Vice City was it first or second grade. But I thought they were the best parents. But I begged them to get it for me, and the soundtrack on that really changed me. So if for those of you that don't know the game plays, you're driving around doing all sorts of bad things, but there's always a radio playing in the car, and if you go to certain spots in the game, the music is playing. And since it takes place in Miami, Vice City in the 1980s, it's like all new wave music, and a lot of deep cuts too, from other styles, but a lot of new wave music. So I got really into new wave, talking stuff like I'm listening to Flock of Seagulls and like Joe Jackson when I'm in second grade. And that's really like the earliest takeaway. So I listened to that stuff and got deeper into it as I grew older, and kind of fell off the music wagon as I got into theater as a kid, but still listened to it. But definitely they revisited in my conscience later on, and then merged, I suppose.
I think that is so intriguing that it all started from video game play.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really is kind of a cross-media influence of the video game itself became your musical influence from the beginning.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too. It's kind of funny because I meet a lot of older people going out to clubs when I first started going out, like to like the goth clubs or the new wave clubs or whatever. And I'm like, oh wait, I can go to a nightclub and listen to this stuff. Or meeting people at our shows even now, and they're like, how did you find out about this? Like, you're how old? Like, no, come on. And I'm like, yeah, this is what I'm into. And
it all roots from video games bridging that generational gap.
yeah, and yeah, thanks Grand Theft Auto.
Well, and I've seen a lot of people reference the soundtrack from Tony Hawk recently.
That's another
as
one
a
too.
big musical influence.
Yeah, and I wasn't even like a gamer kid, and I mean a lot of people that I know nowadays are still gamers and still play. I wasn't even that. I just really loved that game. I loved Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. I remember there's one Tony Hawk where you can play as Kiss too. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kiss getting in on that merchandising still. Yeah, and you can, and there's an area of the game where you can go to a Kiss concert and skate on stage. Yeah, so that era of games really had a lot of, I feel like, responsibility for younger people finding out about old music.
Yeah, and so I know that you're a big fan of Kiss, just from knowing you. When did that come into play, being a fan of Kiss?
So when I was really young, this is the era where we still had a room in our house was just full of VHS tapes that nobody watched. They're just like stuffed away. But I was always just kind of doing my own thing and around my house, and I would just wander off and watch tapes. And there was this tape of what is it called? Kiss Exposed. Is during the Asylum era of Kiss, the era of one of the earliest eras of no makeup Kiss, whereas 80s hair metal culture is what they're all about at that point. And it's a mockumentary, and they basically it's like a day in the life of Kiss, like hanging around their mansion or whatever. And they just go through all the eras of Kiss. They show bootleg tapes, and I just like sat down and watched it one day, and from there I was like, this is my new favorite band. Like, they're just the most outrageous people you can ever imagine, and doing a mockumentary, kind of almost like Spinal Tap style. And yeah, it blew me away, and so that's where that started. And I've always been a Kiss fan. I always will be.
So your musical influences source from VHS tapes of a mockumentary.
Yeah.
And video games.
You had to find these things. You know, you can't just, when you're that little, you can't just go to a record store or buy CDs and figure out what you want. You don't know what to do. You just have to do what you have readily available to you at your fingertips. And if it's a video game that you get for Christmas and you just accidentally find out about stuff, or an old VHS tape, whatever, it's all accident. It was all like a complete accident for me. Yeah.
Do you remember the first album that you actually purchased?
Good question.
Whether that's a CD or buying it on iTunes or whatever application. Do you remember your first album, and why was it that album?
The first album. So I mean, I when I was a teenager, you know, iTunes was coming out, and but I never saw that as buying like an album or buying music. My memory of buying a record is what I would say is like buying my first record. And I think that would have been Disintegration, The Cure.
Nice.
That's the first one I remember. I'm like, I am buying a record, and I'm gonna take it home and take it out and listen to it. I will say just that's the first one that, you know, because if you buy a song for 99 cents on iTunes, now Apple Music, it doesn't really have the same value.
Yeah.
You know?
There wasn't anything physical to latch onto with it.
No.
I remember the first cassette tape that I remember buying was Weird Al Yankovic.
Oh, that's a good start.
And then the first CD is not a good start. It was Achy Breaky Heart. Good old Billy Ray Cyrus.
Oh, yeah.
But that was my first CD that I ever bought. And And while he's regained some popularity due to latching on to some
You're talking Weird Al or Billy Ray?
Billy Ray. Weird Al has obviously never really lost popularity. And with the new documentary, docudrama about him with Daniel Radcliffe coming out, he's obviously going to be right there at the forefront again.
Yeah. He's one of those artists that the general public doesn't take seriously, but like people that are really into music and are like revered, hugely influential.
Oh yeah, and he's an incredible musician on top of it all. And the root of his musicianship started with polka and the accordion far before he became the Weird Al Yankovic that everybody knows.
Yeah.
And I believe his father was also influential within the polka scene prior. So he came from a family where he was vested in polka.
So interesting. Yeah.
But
UHF is one of my favorite movies.
Oh my goodness. I remember renting the VHS.
Yeah. What was that? Even Worse? The bad album? That's so good.
So I absolutely love that your musical influences from the beginning came from varied sources that weren't just music playing in your house. It was found music either through a VHS tape or through the video games that you were playing that really had the influence on you. From the standpoint of your music, do you think any musical theater had any play within your musical influences?
Yeah, it's not something I really thought about too much, but definitely, I think it really comes into play in vocals. So, Hannah and I were both music theater performers, and so we sang a lot, and that's how when we first started singing, both of us, was in that style. And then later on, when we're revisiting stuff that we love from the past, music, and we start adopting some of those vocal characteristics. They were just meshed, So there's definitely a music theater element in both of our singing styles, I would say, that we have today. I haven't really dissected it, like, oh yeah, this song is like Sondheim, or this one is totally like Sunset Boulevard or some whatever, name your musical or whatever, but it's definitely there. And I know it's there because the feeling that whenever you're performing on stage in a show, and you're trying to tell a story through the eyes of someone else, that's a lot of what my style is. Not a lot of the songs that I've written personally are directly from direct experience, but from other people's standpoint, and just things that happen to people. A lot of them, a lot of the experience that I sing about have happened to me, but a lot of it is just telling a story, and so it's inherently there.
So you've talked about your songs a lot. When did you start songwriting?
I started writing solo music when I turned 17. I had a laptop, and I was really into like progressive house and progressive trance music at that time, and I really wanted to know the ins and outs of that, and it being obviously all electronic music and being largely produced on computers. I'm like, well, I can give it a try. So I started doing it that way, but then I started really getting into almost like 8-bit chiptune sounds, and that added to like the new wave thing. It was like like Thompson Twins Mario Kart tonality, and so I was just like taking that and running with it, and then I get to college, and I'm still kind of doing that same trajectory, but then there's like an ambient ambient phase that comes in and kind of, I think, started me on like kind of an atmospheric route that is still present in our music today. But it also started from like writing music on computers when I was younger, and just experimenting with that, and while also being in music theater school, and so when I had time, I was just paying actually as much attention as I could to the writing music. Yeah, it's why I only lasted 2 years in school. I'm like, I can't. I gotta do music. This is where my body and soul lies.
Well, and once you find your passion and find how you want to really pursue that passion, it's really hard to turn that off.
Yeah.
So for your process for songwriting, where do you start at this point?
It varies really. But the most common the way that we do it most is we'll start with something instrumental. We'll create a vibe. We'll create the bones and body of a song, and then from there, however it ends up will influence what goes in lyrically. But sometimes we have started from lyrics, and sometimes it's just a mix of the two, where we know that, like, okay, the hook of this song is gonna sound vocally like this, but we are working with these bones of this song, like this drum and this bass and these keyboards, etc. So it's all really, really Frankenstein-y. So, but I would say most commonly we start with an entire instrumental, like a completed track, and we'll just sing over it.
And the songwriting for Wingtips is really a group effort between you and Hannah.
Yes.
So the two of you, even whenever you let's say you start with an instrumental track, how do you get to that instrumental track? Do you come into it with something in your head, with a melody or a hook that's already in your head, or how do you get to that point in the creation of that instrumental soundtrack that your songs build off of?
Yeah, so it comes from a lot of different angles. Sometimes we'll start with I'm really rhythmically inclined when it comes to songwriting. So a lot of the times I'll start with drums and bass, programming them, and I just go from there, and then I'll add keyboards, synths, strings, whatever, additional percussive sounds on that. I'd build it from there. But right now in the demoing that we're doing, like, I'm starting with a lot of just keyboard parts, like some stuff that's really melodically inclined. But yeah, it's widely variant.
So do you think that's a progression of your songwriting, that you are shifting from rhythmic bass to now melody driving you?
I have no idea. It's just been so all over the place for a long time that it's just whatever comes out first.
It's just
whatever
the
makes
phase that
sense
you're in at the
first.
moment.
Because also a lot of the times, if we start the wrong way, there's just a lot of stuff that we just scrap. If I start with I should start with a drum track or a bass track or a synth track, it just doesn't work. You just have to scrap it, and you just never know what's gonna work. It's really just about like what we're feeling and what direction. And you asked if we have something in our head. That is something that happens a lot, where we I'm hearing something, and a lot of the times what I'm hearing is not what comes out, and just something completely different comes out. It's really all over the place, and
I'm really intrigued by it. You're saying you'll start with a drum track and build that in, and then you'll scrap it. Are you scrapping everything, or are you scrapping what you started with and keeping things that have built out of it and then building off of that?
a lot of the times we just scrap it, but we don't delete it. They're just living in some file folder somewhere. We're just like, let's move on from this. let's start something else. And then what's also good, and I don't know if this is something that could be deliberate for future production, is a lot of the times once we scrap something and we're like, let's just start something new. And as soon as we start something new, just quickly, it just comes together. Sometimes it's just like a warm up, like finding something that doesn't work or working really hard at something that just get frustrated and you scrap it. That's like a mental warm up. And then a song comes out in like a day.
I know a lot of writers and artists that both have essentially practice modes or warm up modes before they really get into what they're writing. To where like they'll start their day with a prompt and write something that it's never going to see the light of day for anyone, but they're starting it with that. And then the same with physical artists. With painting, they have an entire canvas that's just a palette of them putting colors together, and they'll build upon that, and it'll just be basically a test canvas for a long time before it actually becomes anything.
It's probably that same phenomenon I'm experiencing.
Yeah, and you're building up to you're starting your creative process, and you're essentially getting the gears moving, and then finally getting into it.
Yeah, and a lot of the times too, keeping what we scrap, I would say, is, for lack of a better description, we'd like to revisit some of the things we scrap. If stuff that's just a drum and a bass. Like I remember our song "Minimalistic," the first track on the new record, had been sitting as a scrapped piece for like 3 or 4 years on a computer, and it's like, let's just look back through this and see if we have any substance, because it is something that's already there that has some bones, and if it works, you can just quickly build up on it. And I just remember thinking like the driving bass of it would be good for like a chorus, so yeah, we used that piece of scrap, a little bit of scrap metal there. It's not metal.
Well, and there's that's a great perspective, that essentially what you're creating and the creativity that you put out there is never really lost, because you're able to harvest something from it down the line because you're keeping it all on a file.
Yeah. And you forget about it too, and you forget about the anguish of being like, oh, this isn't going anywhere. And you just revisit, because a lot of the stuff that we've scrapped before, I don't even remember doing it. It's like, whoa, this is completely gone from my memory. It's like, but we can do this with it.
Well, and it's also amazing how something that wasn't working for you at a different time, based on your present situation and your present mentality, can come back in a completely different way and hit you in a completely different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And our artistic personalities change all the time, and I think you're right when you revisit something and you're just, if nothing else, it's a completely different person artistically than you were before, and you can see how something else can apply better.
Well, and I think that also speaks to the progression of the Wingtips albums. The sound it's still Wingtips, but each album has a very distinct nature to it. And especially looking at your most recent album, Cutting Room Floor, it really has a very fresh sound to it compared, whenever you look at it against your other albums, that it's something new. And so the feel of your music is continually growing and building. And so I really I really look forward to every new album that you release, because I'm really anxious to hear and feel where you're going.
Yeah.
And where you're moving. So let's talk about your current album, your newest album. Whenever you were putting that album together, was there any specific goal where you guys wanted the music to go?
I think it all just came together in the end. And a lot of it was Frankensteining it. It's pull it, like we were talking about just a minute ago, about pulling different elements from the past, if we had scrap or if we had an old song that we put out in a demo or whatever, we were assembling it that way, but we were refining everything. And by the way, the most of the material is brand new. There's only a couple things that we brought back. And but it was about kind of refining everything to make it as cohesive as it can be. But also it's for us, I think, whenever we think about the record, it's the same for the first record, Exposure Therapy. Every song comes from a different area of our heads, where it just almost feels like, dang, like this album is so like everything is just so different. It's so disjointed. But then, you know, from like an outside perspective, it seems cohesive. But for this time, we were just like consciously trying to see how we could make this arc of the album as cohesive as possible, and make it just kind of like a total artwork instead of just a collection of songs.
Well, and that's something that, you know, back in the 70s and 80s, people really focused on the album as a whole, whereas so much of the music industry these days is singles driven.
Yeah.
And in turn, you get a lot of disjointed albums to where you're jumping around all the time as you listen through somebody's album.
I have noticed that too, and I think that the albums a lot of the albums these days are really so long too. They'll just like put 17 songs in an album, just like, that's insane. And I mean, and I grew up on a lot of the albums from the 80s that are like 10 songs, 12 songs max.
Yeah.
And you can sit down and listen to them in one go. And so
And back then, we were limited by, not we, but the industry was limited by, you know, in the 80s, your focus was cassette tapes. Mm-hmm. And so whatever was on the A and B side, that was your album, whatever you could fit on there. And then you got into CDs, and you were limited as to what you could put on there.
Right.
And now that everything's digital, people are throwing out 17 albums, which that would have been a 2-disc album.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
You know?
Or double vinyl.
Or a double vinyl. Whereas now we can release whatever we want to because it's all digital.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense these days for the goal to just have as much material on an album, just so, you know, you have enough ammo for playlisting. You know, if there's more songs off this record, yeah, just like it's just more stuff to get passed around onto streaming services and playlisting and the old algorithm. You know.
Well, I really love that you're taking the time and the care to really craft an arc of an album in the same way that it used to be. Whenever you know, in a time where the liner notes were important and you'd put the album in and you'd start reading.
Yeah, that's always really important to us, because that's what influenced us to do what we do today, is what we grew up with, and being able to just dive into the artwork as an experience, you know, like pulling out the liner notes and reading what they're saying and learning the songs. I just feel like there's less importance on that today, but yeah, it's always been really important to us. But maybe next time we'll just write 17 songs and it's like put it on an album and it's like 15 songs of filler, 2 singles. Maybe we'll just try that. It seems to be working.
The other phenomenon that I feel like you guys are intentional about is with your music videos. Within an album, the music videos that you guys release within an album seem to all be connected in one way or another, whether it's thematically or whether it's cinematically or through the cinematography. There seems to be a through point that make them all feel as part of one story. Is that intentional as well to really convey the arc of the album that you guys approach?
So I feel like our approach to music videos has been to really give an aesthetic with a loose story. You know, we just kind of like want to go for this vibe, you know, because our music is very vibe driven. And so I think it's important. Like we've always just been really focused on the imagery and like what's happening, as opposed to telling a story, you know. And so that's probably where the crossover one might see is happening, where there's consistent or seemingly consistent elements between the videos. I think, you know, we tend to go for a certain level of cinematography, and certainly it's not all like our videos are not like some monolithic structure where it's just like they all look the same. But I think we just really, as in our music, we're really inclined on making or creating that same atmosphere, but visually. It doesn't always have to be the same, but I think it really speaks to the music, you know, and it varies.
Well, and that explains why or how there seems to be a through point, because you're focused on a through point and a feel throughout your album and an arc throughout your album. And whenever that transfers over, you know, music as far as the vibe and the way that the video feels from the vibe of the music, that there would be a through point there.
Yeah. I think that, you know, we have a certain level of production that we standardize for ourselves, you know, and sometimes it just does it. Sometimes it doesn't meet it. And we don't put some stuff out. But like certainly everything that's out there right now is what we wanted, and what we wanted to convey, and yeah.
So you just came off of a 31, 32 stop tour, your summer tour. One, congratulations for finishing that up, and you need to take some time and rest for sure, because I can't imagine a tour life where you're putting yourself out there and exposing yourself emotionally every night through your music. But talk to us about what that experience is like and how it works for you from tour stop to tour stop, trying to create a consistent show.
You know, it's really happy to be going here because we've talked a lot about the music and the songwriting, but really, we really see ourselves as a live band. Obviously, we come from a performance background, and so really where it's at for us is our live show. A lot of people like we've talked to are like, you know, I listened to your music, and it was like, okay, and it's like it's good, and but as soon as I saw your live show, it was just like a completely different experience. And I think that's what we're really good at what I think we're best at it as artists is creating a live experience. And
I'm really intrigued hearing you talk about the creation of your music, and how you're building everything in the computer and digitally for your songs. How do you then figure out how you're going to then perform all of this in a live setting?
Well, it makes it easy that we're a two-piece because there's a lot of playback, but we take out every element that we can as two individuals can feasibly perform within a song, within a set. So Hannah's doing electronic drums and synth part, singing, where we sing live, and I play guitar on almost every song. And so it's a lot easier than it might seem when described, but
it doesn't seem easy. From listening to all of the layers and depth within your songs, it doesn't seem easy to take that approach and say, okay, I'll do synth here, but I'll do drums here. And how you pick out what's important to do live,
yeah,
to best impact your live show.
Well, also one of the biggest criticisms we got coming up as a live band was, you guys need a drummer. It's all these old heads. Like, you need a drummer. Why do you have a drummer? I'm like, well, we'll give you a drummer. And her name is Hannah. So we got some electronic drums, and so a lot of the stuff that we pull on that half of the stage is percussive, and I really think it's brought a new element to the thing. I mean, I've just played guitar forever, and so it's easy for me to do that, and so I just stick with that. But Hannah's doing like the synth, the drums, the sequencing, and the handling the light show at the same time. And so she's just really doing that show is mainly her. But yeah, it's taken us a while to get where we're at, but it's an evolutionary process. And we're just thinking about like, damn, like what do we do next? You know, like how do we outdo ourselves? It's a bit overwhelming thought.
Well, another question is, when do you decide? Like when you're building the original tracks, do you already have it in mind what layers to the tracks you're going to do live and what layers you're going to go through playback? Or is that something that once you're done with your album and you start to move into your live show that you figured it out at that point? Where does that happen?
I'd say there's a pretty smooth crossover. So I mean, when I'm writing a song or when so I do a lot of the engineering on our tracks too. And I'm really hands-on with the production. So whenever I'm just like listening to a song over and over again, and I start to think about the live element, and I just like, I'm really excited to play this song live, and I just start thinking about what it's going to look like, and what parts of the song that I want to be performed, you know. And also for our live show, we create new elements. So it's not just everything you hear on the record. But whenever you hear a song of ours live, it oftentimes will sound a little bit different. There's just something added, and that is also exciting too, because I really am a fan of going to see a band that their song, you know it, but it sounds a little bit different. There's a live version, but some bands just go and literally play a track and lip sync over it, and it's miserable. So, but it's really important for, the resources that we have and the capabilities that we have to give as much of a live show as we can. Yeah. So we're both thinking about what we want to do live somewhat in advance. And
so it's somewhat of a natural and organic step whenever you go into live, because it's already been processing throughout.
Yeah, it's pretty smooth sailing most of the time, because we know how to do it, and we know what it's going to take. Sometimes we try things and it doesn't work, but we'll just go to something that does work for performing live. So yeah.
So you guys, was this your first like full big tour post-pandemic?
No, we did about 40 dates last September on the West Coast and Midwest and South too, and also we did the whole U.S. With a band, Twin Tribes, as a support for them, and that was our first it was our first tour out after the pandemic, and it was a big one, and it was right after everything was really just started to reopen, and there's still a lot of uncertainty. We didn't know what was going to happen, and at that time, people were just crazy about going to shows. Everything's reopened, and they were just going to whatever. And so the shows had like huge turnouts, and so from going to nothing to what felt like everything was crazy. And so that was last September. The last few dates, or somewhere in the middle, some dates got canceled because of COVID. But then we carried on later and did our own tour on the East Coast. And yeah, and fast forward less than a year later, we're already back on the road doing basically the same run.
That's awesome. And so you've played all over the U.S. You ventured into Canada for a couple of dates as well?
Yeah, so we played Toronto. It was like the very first date of this tour. I don't think we played any Canada dates on the last tour. We'll just go ahead and say no, we didn't.
And then you had a European tour scheduled, and that was right when the Omicron variant really started to surge, and that got canceled for you.
Yeah. The big issue for that one was visa issues, because nowadays visa issues are really, really tough and really common, and the nature of getting a visa as an artist, it's a mess. Someone described to me recently just the process, like in one sitting, and it was like what it takes to get a visa, and it's just like I could never imagine. And so sometimes those things don't pan out, and you don't find out about it until like last minute, or there's so much uncertainty around it that you can't rely on. It's too risky. Yeah, a lot of tours get canceled overseas because of that. And
so are you guys going to try again?
Yeah. So it was the tour. The band we were going to go out with had visa issues. I don't think the level of touring that we were going to do is we don't need that kind of clearance. Or at least I don't think we do. Let's hope that we're all good. So it seems to be pretty good, like pretty good chance. But that'll be later next year. But that's being worked on right now. And we have a couple festivals that we'll be playing in Europe, hopefully regardless of whether a full tour comes into swing, but I believe it will.
Good. Well, have you started working on another album yet?
Very, very minimal dabbling. We're trying to. We're every time we talk about like what direction we want to go in, we're like, yeah, we should do this for the next record, or we should do this or that. The conversation is just completely different every time. It's just like, no, we should do something really noisy and ambient. Oh no, we should do a really pop record. So we're
and that's one of the beautiful things about you guys' music is there's so much versatility within your range that you can still stay true to yourselves and have a completely different feel.
Yeah, and I think whenever we have completed or nearly completed songs, there's enough process of like fluffing things in production to make them sound like they're in the same universe. So that always helps, because really our musical stylings and what we're feeling at the time is widely varying. So you never know what we're going to come out with. But we have some pretty solid direction, I would say, for a new LP. Or maybe we'll do an EP. I don't know. Maybe who knows really. But as far as new material, it's coming, and I think once we chill out on shows, like we say the tour just ended, but like I literally just got an offer for a show in November, a show today that's next week, and we have a show next week in Minneapolis. And so it's like a rocky stop. And so, but once we get some real clear time off, like it's usually in the winter, which is, oh man, it's a rough time to write. But sometimes a good time to write, because you don't want to go outside.
So you like to set down and set out, hey, we're gonna take a break from live shows and we're gonna invest our time into this album.
No, not really. I mean, if we get offers good enough, we'll like break out of the studio and go play a show. But most of the time, one-offs are a bit more difficult for us, because we live where we live now, and in Chicago when we were living there, it would have been a lot easier. But sometimes we're just getting offers in other states, far away, in other countries, or it's just like, yeah, this just doesn't make sense for us, so we're not gonna do it. Yeah, I mean, a lot of bands don't break away from studio time, and they just stick to it. But
Process-wise, do you find it challenging to break away and to go and do a live show, or do you find it as a good break to be able to come back fresh to the studio?
I would say my personal process in the studio is so like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, you know, like I'm just working on stuff when I feel like it. And but I would say the last record, there was a point where I was just going in every single day and working all day on stuff. That was like the first time I've ever done that. I don't know if I'll do it again just because of the impact that has mentally. Also, I was in the middle of winter and I was just kind of had like a shining moment where I'm just like walking around the studio like no, but I think just the general nature of how I do things personally, how I'm cool with working, it's just I'll work on it when I feel like it, when I get inspired. So it's not that difficult for me. But
well, I kind of wondered about that because of how important the live shows are to you and Hannah musically. That if coming off of a live show and that energy would help you and potentially inspire you going back into the studio if you're doing it in the middle of
usually after
sessions.
after we play a show, we're just like want to go to bed forever, like, and just not do anything. Also depending on how the show goes, but or we just like we're like, dang, that was like really, really good. We should just get back on the road, you know. So it could be a bit disruptive, but I mean, probably the most healthy thing to do would be just commit to studio time. But whether we will or won't, who knows?
So I wonder how many people really understand how grueling touring can be, as far as it's not just you guys up there playing songs. Like whenever you're performing, you're really performing in it, and putting everything that you have into it. And what kind of a emotional toll does that take from an exhaustion standpoint?
A really, really big one. So not only is it about getting on stage every night and really being in it and delivering a consistently good and meaningful performance every night, there's also all the preparation. Usually it involves, because we're not big enough to a point where we have an entire crew that put the show together for us and we just walk on stage. One day, hopefully, that would be the dream. But we're doing everything on our own. The day is waking up in a hotel early that we booked ourselves, and we checked into ourselves, and we loaded all of our gear into ourselves, and we load out our gear again. We do all the loading and heavy lifting, transporting, getting in a van, driving ourselves to shows every single day, showing up, loading our stuff up, setting up our entire show, and then doing the performance, packing it up at the end of the night, and just doing it all over again, night after night, and basically no days off. Any days off that we had are usually travel days, which are equally as grueling. So that all plays into the emotional toll, because it's so much hard work, and sometimes we have shows that just are terrible and we feel really bad about them. And then you start to get in your head and question whether or not this is like all worth it. And luckily we have mostly good shows, and so that there's a natural repair mechanism there. And so, but it is an absolute roller coaster. And so by the end of it, you're just like, what do I do? You know, it's not even just like you've been used to something, but you're in a mental state. And a lot of times we just don't know what to do with ourselves when we're back. We're just like, just kind of sit there. We're like, what just happened? But yeah, I think as time goes, we'll hopefully have more weights lifted off of us, less responsibility. But also, I'm such
Less day-to-day task responsibility.
yeah, but also, you know, I'm such a control freak. You know, like to know everything that's going on and kind of like be in charge of everything. I'm like Dio, like just kind of just like, you know, where every light is and you know, like how everything works. And it's just like, well, let me do it, you know? So. And
that's something that you mentioned earlier is that, so you're not just taking a guitar and an amp and a drum pad and a synth in there. You mentioned your lighting gear and that Hannah's firing off the lighting for a show as well. Mm-hmm. You're traveling with your own full light kit meant for club shows.
Yeah, and it's good because like a lot of the times when we play bigger venues, they still work well in tandem with like a huge system, or you know, depending on where we put them. The first part of the tour, we had bar lights that were up on us, and so like you would just see our faces like in a wash or like strobes. But then it was really difficult to play, so we just put it behind us. So we have like this. We've always had this silhouette image where we've had for a long time, where we would have lights behind us, and you kind of just see our silhouette, and little to no light on us, but you kind of just see us there. And so we brought that back, and that worked really well. And but yeah, we bring our own show, and it honestly helps with consistency every night, and so we can kind of feel like we're doing the same show. And you know, even times like I'll work off lighting cues, you know, like I'll move a certain way, and I'll know that when a lighting cue comes on, it's like a movement with some sort of intention, you know. So it helps us deliver consistency too. But you know, you mentioned bringing in an amp, and so doing this stuff night after night, where I was like, I got rid of my amp. I want to make this as easy as possible. Same with the lights. We were carrying on like heavy lighting rigs and putting them on tripods, and like, no, let's just get a couple light bar lights, and I can carry them in a bag. And yeah, it's kind of just streamlining simplicity is what our MO is, I would say.
But at the same time, creating a fully consistent executed show for every time.
Yeah, we definitely want to deliver that same level of production, but
in a more efficient way for yourselves.
Precisely.
And you're walking in, the majority of these venues are providing you with a PA that you plug into.
Yeah.
And they have somebody to mix the show.
Yeah, but even that's something that we've become more self-contained with is before this tour, this most recent tour, you know, we were coming in with our gear and just sending inputs to engineers. But, you know, a lot of the times we just weren't really trusting that the mix was exactly what we wanted, and playing off of wedges night after night and having to go through sound check, that was so grueling too. And just making sure your wedge mix is right, or if someone else is in charge of your in-ears, it changes every time. So what we ended up doing was we got a rack mount mixer, and we all of our for every one of our songs we have a snapshot, and we just go song by song, and every song has its own specific ear mix. Some of the instruments are muted. It's just all there. And really, we just tell the engineer, like, yeah, you know, put a low shelf, some cuts, you know, you can do that, you know, but it's pretty much all there, and you can pretty much do it flat.
So are you just sending them a couple of outs now?
We just send them a left and right.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, that makes their job a lot easier.
Yeah, and we were kind of skeptical of how people would react. At first, we're like, no, like we're going to be sending them everything, and some people are going to get really freaked out by that. Almost every engineer, they're like, really? You're just sending me to it? You're speaking my language.
It's an easy night.
Thank you so much. I don't have to. I don't have to mix your wedges. The monitor guy doesn't have to. Amazing. Let's roll.
Well, and it's, but it creates consistency for you because you know
Yeah.
that your levels are all going to be where they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
As opposed to a new engineer every night that has never heard your band before,
Right.
or doesn't know your music well enough to know what should be at what levels. And so you guys are once again creating that consistent show
Yeah.
for your live shows every time.
Yeah. So that's been pleasant. People love, like, in-house engineers love it when we tell them what we're working with.
I can't wait to see you guys live. I've seen live recordings and I've seen your live streams and I've never seen an actual live show, and I hope to get there soon.
Maybe here one day.
One day.
When's Tiffany coming back?
That's a good question. But I look forward to that. Thank you for coming and spending some time with us today. And I look forward to hearing your next album and seeing the direction you guys go on that one.
Yeah, it's great to be here, and yeah, thanks for having me, and good to talk to you as always.
All right. Thank you, Vincent.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for State of the Art Southern Illinois, a podcast by the Marion Cultural and Civic Center, featuring local artists, artisans, musicians, arts organizations, and arts events in Southern Illinois, as well as touring artists coming to the Marion Cultural and Civic Center. Special thanks to Vincent Segretario for his time speaking with us today, and a special thank you to Vincent and Wingtips for providing this episode's soundtrack. Join us every Thursday morning for a new episode on Facebook, YouTube, or whatever audio podcast service you prefer. And now for Run for Shelter by Wingtips in its entirety.